So what is this whole thing all about? And I'm going to be cruising through some of this because we do have quite a bit to cover. So we want to learn a little bit more about what this concept of an IWT is. Some people will call them, integrated weather teams, or some people just kind of give it a general weather workshop type name. But we really want to get to know more about each other. And, we obviously all introduced ourselves, but we don't necessarily all have a real good perspective on what our varying roles are, within the whole paradigm of emergency messaging and response. Certainly want to build on the existing relationships we have, and also seek to find new relationships we might not have solidified all that much, right? And kind of coming together in this same virtual space, and whenever we're past pandemic or post-pandemic, however you want to categorize that, hopefully we can get in the same physical space and start talking to each other about some of this stuff. And want to make sure that our communication is really streamlined and is efficient and effective. That's the real key part. Anytime that there's kind of a major failure, it seems like communication is kind of what it always leads back to, some kind of a communication breakdown. So it's all about trying to figure out ways to best communicate with each other and also with the outside world and our partners as well. So just a few ground rules here. We definitely want you all to participate. Now, I will say we've got a couple opportunities kind of built in here. I might have, depending on how quickly I get through these presentations, a minute or two at the end of each of the slide decks here to just ask some general open-ended questions. But we do have a break time built in for some open discussion. And then, depending on how much time you have, I plan to stick around after it's over as well if folks want to stick around and talk a little bit longer. We're not here to judge you, and we certainly hope no one else here is looking to judge anybody else. We don't want to take anything personally. It's perfectly fine to offer candid perspectives, especially going back to maybe specific events. But hopefully you can kind of stay within your area of expertise for the most part, and try and stay factual and on topic. We did introductions already, but if you feel a need, to chime in with something, say, hey, this is Mark here in Pendleton, or this is Ed here in Pendleton. That helps us kind of get an idea of kind of where you're coming from, and definitely ask questions when you have the opportunity. So who are the main players in this integrated warning team structure? Well, you'll notice there's three there. We've got kind of the National Weather Service side. Obviously, that's us. The media side's a real big part of that as well. Primarily from the messaging standpoint and communicating. They've reached generally a larger audience for the most part. And then you've got the emergency management side, which is really kind of the resource and response hogs, right? I mean, they're the ones that are kind of getting things positioned out ahead of a big event, and they're generally responding both during and after events. And then kind of the long-term goal is to try and mitigate these big disasters from happening in the future. And I would lump the fire folks, a lot of the fire folks, kind of in that emergency response group, and so that's why it's really great that we can have some of you guys on here today, because it gives us a unique perspective we may not always have otherwise. The objective, again, it's all about improving communication among all the different facets of the, weather warning, weather response, and safety initiative. We want to become better acquainted with each other, have a better idea of what it is that you guys have to do on a daily basis, give you guys an idea of what we have to do day after day. So we can have, better expectations and better understanding, and try to avoid a lot of the assumptions. It seems like when something goes wrong, we try to find, we start making assumptions and try and find other outlets for blame, right? So we want to try and, get away from that, clear a lot of that out of the way. And ultimately, we really want to make sure we're delivering timely and coordinated messaging so the public can take actions to protect themselves and protect their property. So our role, more specifically, is to provide enhanced communication, and that generally comes via briefings of various sorts. So it could be email briefings, live webinars if we're looking at a particularly hazardous event. But there's all kinds of other communication that happens too, right? NWS chat, which I'll talk about here a little bit more in just a bit, to make sure we're kind of all on the same page and we're getting that consistent message out. We really like to participate in drills and exercises when we have a chance. Obviously, COVID has really beaten back the potential for a lot of in-person participation, right? But certainly as we start moving out of that, we want to be more involved with that. One we're heavily involved with year after year is the exercise at the Columbia Generating Station. That's a FEMA exercise, and we've been really fortunate to be able to work with the emergency managers there and some of the other officials involved in that to help them kind of with the weather piece of that exercise. It's a real benefit to us because, you know, we're kind of working on our briefing and public speaking skills, but we're also getting a better idea of what the emergency response piece is and how, you know, challenging that is, and all the different factors that go into it, because weather is just a tiny slice, you know, but it's critical information, but it's just a tiny piece of what happens in those exercises. We also like to support either planned or unplanned events. Planned events would be something like the Tri-Cities Water Follies. We have provided on-site support for them over the last number of years, with the exception of obviously last year. And of course, those unplanned events are the things, you know, where big disaster happens, you know, there's a hazmat leak or something like that. Those are the kinds of things we really like to try and leverage because they give us that opportunity to fortify and build relationships and also give us exposure to all the different facets that are at work in those events. Always available to assist with media interviews. It's always fun to do, you know, get on camera for a little while, or even if it's just a phone call, just to talk about weather. It could be historical, it could be related to an event, it could be just related to our career, you know, more about the weather guys over at the National Weather Service, or the weather girls, I should say, and assist in planning and mitigation efforts. We've recently been involved in helping Umatilla County and I think several counties in Central Oregon with their natural hazard mitigation plans, and that's always a rewarding experience as well. So I'll pose just a couple open-ended questions here, and, you know, maybe one or two of you might want to chime in. Actually, you know what? We'll hold that since we're kind of running short on time. Hold these questions. You know, when we get to that break period, maybe we can talk about this a little bit more. I can go back and pull this slide up if I need to. So, you know, think about your role and your responsibility. Where do you see yourself fitting kind of in here? You know, I think media is pretty clear cut, but with the emergency management side of things, you know, that's a huge category. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different arms that split off of that. So where do you fit in there? How do you feel about the status of communication with the National Weather Service, with other folks that are involved in the call? How do you feel that we're communicating? Do you see ways we could easily improve communication? And are there any recent events going back a year or so where you could see some possible improvements? So think about those things. When we get to the break, I think we'll have time to discuss some of this. I briefly want to talk about a couple of communication tools that are really helpful to us, but I think also helpful to you. NWS Chat's a really great one. I know several of you on the call here are very active in that, you know, and monitor that and also chat with us. It gives you access to us basically 24/7. So we're always logged into NWS Chat. And, you know, if you have any questions about anything, you're welcome to jump in there and ask us. Also, if we have an evolving situation and there's really important information we want to pass along and make sure, for instance, you know, we've got a big severe weather event or something, and we've got a storm that's ready to hit a specific area, and we're getting a lot of reports of very large hail. We're talking golf ball or larger. It's a great way for us to be able to, you know, send that information in chat, and then maybe some of the media folks can pull that out and say, okay, the Weather Service is saying they've gotten a lot of reports of baseballs and 80-mile-per-hour winds out of the storm, so take it seriously. You know, it's kind of that the way to provide that consistent message that can then be broadcast out to everybody else. So here's just kind of some quick tips on how to sign up. There's a URL there you can go to, and you'll want to create a new account if you don't have one already. We will get a request and we can go through that and review it. You do have to be in the public safety, emergency management, either that or federal, state, or local government official, a member of the media, or the exceptions to those would be if you're an amateur radio operator affiliated with Skywarn, which is kind of the spotter training aspect. So those are the kind of the main qualifications you'll have to have in order to get an account. But for the most part, everyone on here probably falls into one of those categories. Another one I find really useful is INWS. And it allows you to receive alerts on your text, either by text or by email. I think you can program multiple locations. I still have my parents' address, my old address in Oklahoma when I used to live there, obviously here. and a couple others in there. And basically, anytime an official, watch warning advisory product goes out, you will get a text, a message, or email, depending on what your preference is. And you can actually change which types of watch warning advisories you get alerted for. So really great, a really great tool that you can use and keep on your phone at all times to help you out. You can sign up for an account with the URL there. Again, I will note that all these presentations will be made available after the meeting concludes. And I am recording this as well. So a recording will also be made available. All right, let's move on here. Let's see where we're at with time. I did want to just quickly ask, does anybody have any comments or questions so far? I think everyone should be unmuted. Maybe not. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. So Larry, it is going to be your turn. I'll make sure looks like you're unmuted. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Today I want to talk to everybody about two weather-related programs, and the programs are similar in some ways and different in some ways. And as I get through the presentation here, you will hopefully see their similarities and differences. But just a little bit of a background here. The National Weather Service for a number of years has been promoting an effort called the Weather Ready Nation. And basically, they have been wanting to get nationwide response, resilience, and preparedness from the individual all the way up to businesses, cities, states, and counties, weather ready. So when a weather-related disaster strikes, people know what to do, cities know what to do, towns know what to do, states know what to do, and they've developed these two programs to assist with that. And the first program under that is called the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program. And the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program is the more informal of the two programs. Basically, it's an initiative to strengthen partnerships with external organizations to build community resilience. Basically, this one can go anybody from a small business to a municipality, a school. All the National Weather Service needs from an interested party is an email address and somebody who's interested in weather, and they can become a Weather Ready Nation ambassador. It enables organizations to serve as change agents and force multipliers in their communities, and it recognizes partners, as I said earlier, to improve the nation's readiness, responsiveness, and resilience against against extreme weather events. Next slide, Mark. Okay, it's totally voluntary. The most important question we get asked about either program, this one or the next one I'm going to talk about, is how much does it cost? They're both free. They're both voluntary. With this one, basically, you give us an email address, and you will get messages about weather safety. There'll be severe weather safety weeks, winter weather safety weeks, and we'll ask you to promote those messages, whether it's on your social media, whether, any methods that you may have available. There are actual brochures that you can provide if you have the capability of doing that. You can print them out from the NOAA, the National Weather Service website. Share your best practices and success stories, and of course, serve as an example by educating your employees and workplace on weather safety as well. And anybody, like I said, this is the more informal of the two programs. And you'll also can get a nice sign, as you see there. Several of us presented this, believe it was 2 years ago. And basically, we get a lot of questions from, especially from some of the smaller businesses, like if I'm providing this information, if I'm a hotel and I'm providing weather information, isn't that going to potentially scare some people away? And my response is quite the opposite. If you're providing weather safety information, you're educating people, and hopefully they're not going to have to be rescued, or they're not going to become a statistic if they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. Next slide, please, Mark. You will develop a closer working relationship with your local National Weather Service office, and for everybody on this call, that should be us. You will get access to the official Weather Ready Nation Ambassador logo, which again, you'll see pictured there. And you can get selected to be the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador of Excellence, which occurs on an annual basis. So again, you're basically just sharing either information that we provide on weather safety, and you will get information that comes down from the national level of the National Weather Service. And you can share it via social media. You can share it obviously with your workforce, however you choose to do that. And just by doing that, you're hopefully educating, whether it's your customers, people that may be staying at, maybe patronizing your business, and you're hopefully making everybody more weather ready. Now, if you yourself, who may be listening to this, are not interested in these programs, if you know somebody who is, then certainly, spread the word to them. And again, for this one, all you need to do is provide either me or Mark your email address, and you're signed up. It's really that simple. The next one, which we're going to talk about, next slide, please, Mark, it's called Storm Ready. And this one is a little bit more involved. It's a program that focuses on improving communication and severe weather preparedness, prepares communities to respond to hazardous weather, provides detailed and clear guidance on how to improve warning and weather preparedness programs and associated emergency plans. And again, like the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program, it's totally voluntary and free. Next slide. 90% of all presidentially declared disasters are weather related. On average, about 500 people die each year in the US due to weather. And severe weather results in over $14 billion in economic losses each year. So that's why this is very important. Next slide, please, Mark. It fosters improved working relationships among emergency management and public safety and the National Weather Service. And we have on this IWT today at least two that I know of, and possibly more, emergency managers, Liz and Sean, that are from storm-ready counties. And so certainly I could sit up here and preach the benefits of this, but if you have any questions from the emergency management standpoint, you can ask, reach out to them, how it's worked for them, how it's benefited them. Next slide, please. The National Weather Service will assist in developing local hazard risk assessments and mitigation plans, and also supports weather-related exercises and events. Next slide. Ensures regular review of all hazard emergency and communication plans, and helps keep them consistent and up to date. Next slide. Now, provides emergency managers and coordinators tools and information to justify funding for hazardous weather resources. One of the questions that we get asked is, does the Storm Ready program provide any funding? The Storm Ready program itself does not provide any funding, but saying that you're storm ready can potentially help when you're filling out a grant application, say for FEMA or something like that, but the program itself does not provide any funding. Next slide. And it could also allow communities to reduce flood insurance rates as part of the National Flood Insurance Program Community Rating System. Next slide. And it enhances responsiveness and resilience in the face of threatening weather, and it demonstrates a commitment to protecting lives and property on the part of the recognized community or entity. Now, Storm Ready started out, basically, it was only states, cities, towns, municipalities. It has expanded and is now private industry, hospitals, colleges. I know Eastern Washington University, Robert Cepeda was on here, he was listening, and we just declared them storm ready a month or two ago. Colleges and universities are on here and have become storm ready. Amusement parks, large corporations, tribal nations. So, but because of what is involved in becoming storm ready, it is a little bit more of an involved program. So it tends to be larger businesses, cities, states. You do need, it is a busier application process. One of the things that needs to be done, usually the entity that wants to become storm ready has to visit the National Weather Service, and then we have to visit their office. Obviously, in light of COVID, that is something that we've generally been postponing until after we get back to whatever the new normal will be after COVID, but don't let that discourage you if you are interested in becoming storm ready. Now you can see here we have a list of the storm ready sites in Oregon, and on the next slide we'll have one in Washington. It tends to be the more populated areas, but if somebody is interested, certainly, you know, it's not only restricted to the more populated areas. So I encourage anybody, again, if you are listening today and you're not interested, but you know somebody who may be interested, to please, pass my information or Mark's information on to them, because, we do have quite a few gaps in our area. And, we don't have much down in the Bend Redmond area, down in Central Oregon, places like that. And, we'd love to get some, more storm ready sites in our area. But if you don't have, like I said, if it doesn't interest you, and you know somebody who thinks that you think would be a benefit to, let them know. We would certainly help anybody fill out the application, and hopefully we could get some increased interest in it. But you don't have to be a large population center to become storm ready. It just seems like in our area, that's how it has sort of filtered out. And next slide, please, Mark. And again, if you want any specific information on the programs themselves, there are some links, or you can just contact Mark and I, and we can send you, we can let you know specifically. And I, certainly I actually finished early, a little bit early, which is rare for me. So I could take any specific questions right now. If not, we can move on to the next presenter.
All right, thanks, Larry. Yeah, if anybody has any comments or questions, I did want to note with Central Washington University, they recently got storm ready there at the end of last year, and of course that's all taken place within the pandemic timeframe. So certainly there's flexibility there. Like Larry said, don't let that discourage you from applying if you have an interest in that. I believe I've unmuted everybody, so if anyone has any questions specific to this. Okay, all right, we'll continue to move on then. I'm going to try and kind of blitz through this next presentation here, and hopefully that leaves us a little bit more time for discussion and our break. Anything else you wanted to add, Larry, before I move on?
No, I think we're, like I said, if anybody has any questions, we could talk about it during the break. But like I said, we're encouraging people to sign up in either one of these programs. Weather Ready Nation's probably a little easier for most. The Storm Ready is a little bit more involved. But if, certainly I know there was somebody on here, I thought they said they were from agricultural company or something. If they have any questions about Storm Ready, I'd certainly be willing to chat with them afterwards.
All right, that sounds great.
If they're interested, so.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. So our next topic is going to be on our decision support through the warm season. Traditionally, this is primarily fire weather, although we do occasionally get a severe weather episode like we saw last May, or perhaps a high wind event like we're going to, maybe not high wind, but strong wind events, blowing dust, that kind of stuff like we had today. So decision support in general is just all about providing weather information, including timing, our confidence in occurrence, and impacts that ultimately, hopefully, help you make better decisions. So in the past, I know we've done more scheduled type briefings. I believe it was last year we moved to more of an event-driven format for our fire weather briefings. We are going to stick with that model this year, based on some feedback we have received from some of our fire weather partners, especially here just in the last month or two. We are going to try to be, more sensitive on the fire weather side whenever we're detecting the potential for hazardous fire weather conditions. There's kind of two groups. We've got kind of the fire weather aspect of things, which is really kind of its own animal. There's a lot of complexities that go into that. And then while summer tends to be a pretty quiet time of year for us weather-wise, we can occasionally have those strong to severe thunderstorm events. We can have prolonged air quality episodes like we saw last September, which is really, really terrible. I know Peter's going to comment on that later. Pretty rare for us to have an excessive heat event that lasts for an extended period, but certainly if we're looking at a period of 3 or more days of back-to-back, triple digits, that's something that's noteworthy, and we would be providing some correspondence on that, either by email or a live briefing. So generally speaking, we'll begin sending email briefings out on a daily basis about 3 to 5 days ahead of an expected event. And depending on our confidence in the event's occurrence, it could even be longer than that, but tends to be if we're kind of not real confident something's going to happen, it may be closer to that 2 to 3 day time frame, but we certainly try to provide as much advance notice as we possibly can. The live briefings, we're kind of trying to escalate with time, right? So live briefings are generally going to be tied to those higher impact events and generally occur 1 to 2 days ahead of those events. So just kind of a schematic here to give you an idea of how something might unfold. Our briefing, practices might unfold for a high impact event. We have kind of our impact scale here, these different rows with different colors. So let's say we've got a high impact event coming on Saturday. Maybe it's a severe weather event. We'll do that. We're expecting a lot of lightning. We're expecting to have thunderstorms that could have hail up to golf ball size, winds to 70 miles per hour, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we peg that and say, okay, that's going to be a pretty high impact event. So this is kind of generally what you can expect from us as far as our briefings go. If we were highly confident that was going to happen Saturday, as early as Wednesday, possibly even earlier, just depending on confidence, you should start seeing some type of correspondence from us by way of email. I'll get to it later, but we basically have some different partner email lists that we send those email briefings to. And then as we get closer, the day before or maybe even 2 days before the event, depending on its expected severity, that's when we would hold a live webinar that would give a little bit more detailed information and also provide an opportunity for you to ask us questions or get clarification on anything. Another facet of our briefing program or our decision support is a weekly kind of overview briefing, and those occur on Sundays. We've done that through the winter time for pretty much all of our partners. Pretty much every Sunday, we kind of send out this broad overview of any winter weather threats coming in the next 7 days. We're going to continue to do that through the warm season, and traditionally these are tied more to fire weather. But if we do have a situation where we're expecting possibility of severe thunderstorms or strong winds or excessive heat for a number of days, it's possible we would include kind of our larger audience as well. So this is just a brief look at what the email briefing template looks like. This is kind of still in the works a little bit. We're kind of changing it slightly from what we've been doing over the last year or two. But it's fairly similar overall, right? Basically, it's kind of mostly a one-pager, maybe a few more pages if we have graphics to attach to it, that highlights what the main event is, the bottom line up front, kind of the key points, the main things we want you to be aware of. Any changes from the last briefing, if we're getting a situation where we're becoming more confident and we start, issuing watches, warnings, that kind of stuff, or, maybe the potential for severe weather is really ramped up or the wind speeds have ramped up, that's where we can indicate that things have changed under that changes from previous briefing category. The weather and impacts outlook is generally unchanged from how we've been doing it over the last couple of years. Gives you kind of that long view of any upcoming hazards. Generally speaking, that's going to have 5 to 7 days in there. If we really want to highlight a specific time frame, it's possible there could be some modification there, but again, we're kind of still working through that. But it's generally going to follow that look and feel as far as color and layout. And then the area where you may see the most change is under the details section there. It tends to be, I think the way we have it laid out now, it's kind of by geographic region, and then we have kind of a confidence section, what we're highly confident in, what we have medium confidence in, and what we have low confidence in. And Ed's going to spend a bit of time talking about confidence and uncertainty and messaging toward the latter half of the meeting here. But we're kind of reformatting that a little bit and kind of making it more of a table that tries to encompass more of the kind of the what, where, when, and specific impacts, while also folding in some of that confidence information. So just to be aware, a bit of a change from what you've seen recently, but the same information is going to be there even if it looks slightly different. Okay, so for our webinars, those are going to still be done on an event-driven basis and tend to be tied to our impact levels. So if we're looking at an event that's going to bring about moderate to extreme impacts, those would trigger a webinar. And obviously, if we're very confident we're going to have a high to an extreme, extreme impact would be something borderline historic. Think about the floods we had back in 2020 here in Northeast Oregon. Maybe some of the heavy snow events we had back in February 2019. Those are kind of on that extreme end of impacts. Whereas most of the events we have are going to be kind of in that moderate to high area if we get that high. So once we kind of get into that zone, that's when we'll start setting up a webinar. And those are generally going to occur a day, possibly 2 days before an event, depending on how confident or how sure we are that that is going to occur. And, if we do it 2 days before, likely we'll have one a day before as well, just to kind of keep the communication flowing. There's going to be, we're still working on this as well, but there'll probably be some slight changes as far as appearance go to our webinars as well this year. I know specifically for fire briefings in the past, we've had kind of an internal briefing application we've used that's got a bunch of different graphics, and you kind of pull up the one you want to look at. And we're really trying to move more to a presentation style that's a bit more, linear that we progress through. Should be able to enable you to see the graphics a little bit better. And we're also going to be, refining the graphics we're actually using in those briefings. So should be generally a cleaner feel, more consistent, and hopefully provide better communication, better understanding of what we're looking at. And the same would go for other webinars as well. We're really trying to kind of move more to this presentation style. I mentioned this before, but we will continue to do our weekly outlook briefing. Traditionally, that's a fire weather outlook. And in most cases, outside of a fire event, we don't have a lot of impactful weather in this part of the country. But, should we have a thunderstorm event that poses a severe risk, or, extended period of really, really hot temperatures, then we may, kind of loop in a broader number of our partners. We have two different email lists for these briefings. There's kind of a general decision support list, and then we have kind of our fire weather cadre of people that we send stuff to. So if it's something that's a bit more broad, we may loop both of those in on the weekly outlook. But generally speaking, it's going to be primarily our fire partners that receive those. Okay, switching gears here a little bit. There are some important changes coming with respect to our hydrology products specifically. So there's been a hazard simplification project that's been going on for the last 3 to 5 years, and maybe even longer than that. Essentially, the Weather Service, as we have so many watch, warning, advisory products, and finally we're like, this is just getting to be a little too much. So the hazard simplification project is essentially looking at all those and finding ways to streamline and consolidate as much as possible. Try to bring things back to simplicity, because you start adding on all kinds of products and all types of different advisories, it gets really, really confusing. So this specific aspect is going to touch on hydrology. And you can see it in the bottom there that essentially you've got all these different urban and small stream flood advisory, small stream flood advisory, all this other stuff, kind of consolidating that all into one base flood advisory. And then the reasoning behind that flood advisory can be, within the product. We don't need to have separate advisories just for the type of flooding we're looking at. In addition to that, all the hydro products that go out, that includes watches, warnings, and advisories, with the exception of the flash flood watches for certain non-convective causes, are going to move to a slightly different format in terms of the text. So some of these flood products can get really lengthy, especially the advisories. So we're moving to more of kind of that what, where, when, and impacts, more of a bulleted format. Should be a lot easier to ingest and digest, and especially for some of our media partners, to quickly comprehend what we're sending out and then be able to go out and broadcast that to the greater public. So here's just a table kind of comparing and showing you where all the consolidation is expected to take place. Another important note is that flash flood watches for excessive rainfall or for heavy rain are going to be moved to more of just flood watch. So we're really trying to get away from the flash flood watch versus the flood watch, that whole thing. There is still the situation of a dam break or levee failure or a possible debris flow if you have a big wildfire and then you get heavy rain on top of all the debris that's sitting there. Those are very specific, so those will maintain the flash flood watch wording for those. But otherwise, it's pretty much all going to be flood watch. I mentioned the advisories, kind of merging all those 5 or so different products into one flood advisory, and then just the format change as far as the wording goes. Also, some changes coming to our severe thunderstorm warnings and what we would consider SPSs or special weather statements. For severe thunderstorm warnings, they're now going to include a tag. Some of you may be familiar with tornado warnings and the tags considerable or destructive or catastrophic. So they're adding a tag now to severe thunderstorm warnings as well. And there's a particular tag, destructive, which is like the highest magnitude tag you can have on a severe thunderstorm warning, that will actually trigger wireless emergency alerts. And I'll show you a table that kind of breaks that down here in a second. Special weather statements also are going to add some options, some tags for sub-severe storms, strong thunderstorms that are kind of in that borderline severe range. And we'll look at that here in just a second. So for severe thunderstorm warnings, the base tag is if you don't select anything above kind of just what the normal run-of-the-mill severe is, then that's not going to trigger wireless emergency alert. There's also this considerable tag. That's when you're expecting wind speeds up to 70 miles per hour or hail up to golf ball size. Also not going to trigger a wireless emergency alert. But going back to May 30th of last year, the cell that developed over western Deschutes County and then moved up through Jefferson and Wasco counties, that storm had wind speeds anywhere from 80 to, I think, 115 miles per hour based on our damage survey. So I believe when I was issuing warnings for that storm, I was putting in 80 plus mile per hour winds at times. That storm, based on the wind speed, would have fallen into the destructive tag category, and that would have triggered a wireless emergency alert. And the whole purpose here is that, when people hear tornado warning, they, seem to take that pretty seriously. A lot of people hear severe thunderstorm warning and they're kind of like, it's just a storm, what's the big deal? Well, as we saw last year, severe thunderstorms can be far more destructive over a much larger area than a tornado can, and we don't get a lot of tornadoes here anyway. So the whole idea of getting this WA functionality, wireless emergency alerts, where cell phones are going off because, there's a big time severe storm. The whole idea is to get people's attention, take this seriously. 80-mile-per-hour winds, baseball or larger hail, that's serious business. You got to get inside. That's as deadly, if not more so, than a tornado. In the SPSs for sub-severe storms, but strong storms, just a couple of the different tags that are possible. The hail and wind tags will always be there. Traditionally we include a hail and a wind speed with these anyway. They're sub-severe, so under 1 inch hail and wind gusts under 58 miles per hour. There's also this option of a land spout. We don't deal with water spouts here. We do deal with land spouts quite a bit. Now that's traditionally, I think that's probably the more common tornado type we get out here, actually. These brief spin-ups, there was one, I think, in Pasco just a couple of weeks ago, in fact. You've got a little area of spin already in the atmosphere, and a shower or storm pops up on top of that and stretches it out. That's essentially what a land spout is. So it will include a capability to mention land spout if we believe that's a possibility in the SPSs. So that's an upcoming change. So just summing it all up here, just because we don't have scheduled webinars every day or every 2 or 3 days doesn't mean we're not going to be doing less briefings. It's essentially a combination of sending out email briefings and also doing these live webinars, right? It just depends on how busy the season is. If we get a real active fire season, last year overall was not active. It really didn't get active until, I think, July, August, and September, right? So kind of the traditional fire season, but really picked up after that big wind event in September. So the more active it is, obviously the more briefings and correspondence you're going to get from us. So just open-ended questions as we go into our break time here. What questions or comments do you have regarding our briefing plans? And is there anything specific you would like to see in our briefings that you haven't seen in the past? And let's see if I can be successful in unmuting everyone here. All right, you should be able to unmute yourself, so somebody give it a try and let me know if you can. Doesn't look like it.
Hey, Mark.
Okay, I can hear somebody now.
This is Jeff King, Klickitat County.
Hey, Jeff, how's it going, man?
It's going.
This is Peter in Bend. Yep, we can talk.
Okay, good deal. So, just kind of some general questions. We could also go back to that, I think that early slide I had, just kind of introducing the integrated warning team, what it is, what it isn't, where you kind of feel like you fit in the paradigm, what your roles are. I mean, does anybody have any thoughts along those lines or along any of the content you've seen so far?
This is Peter. I have some thoughts just along lines where we see those windstorms and we see wind events, and then we start thinking about fire. If it's in a time of year where there can be fire, or there's possibility of fire at that time, yeah, that's a little frightening from an air quality standpoint to think about, like, oh my gosh, if this starts, but pulling in wind and fire like we had last September, more over on the western side, but that would be important.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. If we had the event that we're having today, kind of with this northeast wind, and it was July or August, it would be a different animal. It would be a lot more concerning, assuming it's dry, which it is, from a fire weather standpoint. So yeah, time of year plays a factor in there as well. Yeah, that particular event too, it didn't stop east of the Cascades. In fact, it got worse as it went over the crest, and then kind of on the west side there, they got the the downslope winds, the warming, the rapid spread of the fires that were already there. So yeah, I hope we can get through this season without seeing something like that. I do have a couple questions that came in on the question box here, and there is a feature in the menu there on the right hand side where you can enter a question. So if you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself and talking, that's fine. You can put it in there. Robert Zapita there at Central Washington University was asking if the slides would be available, and yes, they will be. And I did notice that there was a little bit of a typo there on one of the slides where I think I showed Oregon and it said Washington at the top. So I caught that. I will change it before I send them out. Anyone else have any questions or thoughts so far on the content that we've covered this morning? I know I finished a little bit late, so we don't have as much time, but I did want to give folks a chance to talk because, again, you know, I could sit here and talk all day, but I want to make sure that people are, you know, comprehending and understanding and have a chance to voice any concerns or anything they have. All right, well, I have a couple of minutes here at least before we start our next break. So if anyone thinks of anything, I'll be here. You know, I think I turned my camera on, so you can look at me here and I guess just enjoy looking at my face. But yeah, if you have any questions or thoughts, go ahead and chime in before we get started here at the top of the hour.
Yeah, this is Peter again, and I was just thinking that you have lots of tools, lots of resources that I wasn't quite always aware of the full amount of that the National Weather Service has. And it's like, oh yeah, I could tune into all these products if I have time, but I can clue into them to help myself be better organized, be better ready for those, you know, whether it's high wind events or cold events or, you know, whatever it is coming from the National Weather Service. But lots of different products and lots of different details and insights that you guys have that it's not always easy for me to get a hold of and to tie into, but I appreciate sharing that information and being able to jump into it, hopefully here in the near future.
Right, and we always try to make ourselves available and accessible too. So, you know, there's NWS chat, that's an option, but you can always call the office too. At the end of the presentation, I'll include a slide that's got some contact information so that you can, you know, how to reach out to our office. And, you know, there's also like a group email address that you can send questions to. So if something comes up after hours, well, we're always there, right? There's no after hours for us. So we're always available. We're always ready to take questions. We've got at least 2 people there at all times. So no matter what time of day it is, you're welcome to contact us.
That's always appreciated because often I do a different hour, so it helps.